Susan Reynolds massaged her swollen belly as she stared out the hospital window at the Boston skyline. 6 months pregnant with her first child, she should have been filled with joy. Instead, anxiety gnawed at her insides as she checked her phone for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Michael was late. Again. The April rain pelted against the window, matching her gloomy mood. She'd been admitted for observation after experiencing some concerning cramping that morning. Nothing serious, the doctors assured her, but enough to warrant monitoring for 24 hours. "Mrs. Reynolds?" A nurse with kind eyes poked her head into the room. "Your test results look good. Dr. Williams will be by in about an hour to discuss them with you." Susan forced a smile. "Thank you." As the nurse left, Susan's phone buzzed with a text message. "Stuck in traffic. Be there when I can." Susan sighed, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. Michael Reynolds, her husband of 3 years, was the definition of corporate success. Harvard MBA, investment portfolio that turned everything to gold, and a corner office at one of Boston's most prestigious financial firms. But lately, the 60-hour work weeks had stretched to 70, then 80. The man who'd once surprised her with weekend getaways now barely made it home for dinner. She placed her hands protectively over her belly. "It'll be different when you arrive," she whispered to her unborn daughter. "Dad's just busy right now." Her phone rang, and her brother's name flashed on the screen. Unlike Michael, Nathan Wheeler hadn't forgotten her hospital stay. "Hey, Nate," she answered, unable to hide the relief in her voice. "How's my favorite sister doing?" His deep voice carried the confidence that had propelled him to CEO of Wheeler Tech by 35, but also the warmth that made him her closest confidant. "I'm your only sister," Susan replied with a small laugh. "And I'm fine, just some false alarms. Have they done an ultrasound?" "Yes, everything looks good. Baby girl's heartbeat is strong." "That's what I like to hear. Is Michael with you?" Susan hesitated. "He's on his way." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "Nate, he's busy with the Harrington account. It's a big deal." "Not bigger than his wife and child," Nathan said firmly. "Listen, I'm heading to the airport for my flight back from New York. I can be there in about 4 hours. You don't need to do that. I'm being discharged tomorrow morning." "Too late. Already changed my flight. Besides, I haven't seen you in weeks, and I need to talk to my niece about her stock options." Susan laughed. "She's the size of an avocado. Never too early to start planning. I'll see you soon, okay?" "Okay," she said. "Love you, Nate." "Love you too, sis." After hanging up, Susan closed her eyes, trying to ignore the growing unease about Michael's absence. He'd been so excited when they first found out about the pregnancy, painting the nursery himself, reading parenting books, even taking a prenatal class with her. But in the past 2 months, something had changed. His touch no longer lingered. His eyes no longer met hers when they spoke. He was physically present, but emotionally gone. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting a nurse. Instead, Michael strode in, his 6-foot frame impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His dark hair was damp from the rain, but otherwise he looked like he'd stepped off a magazine cover. "Sorry I'm late," he said, not sounding particularly sorry as he checked his watch. "How are you feeling?" "Better now," Susan said, reaching for his hand. Michael squeezed her fingers briefly before pulling away to check his phone. "What did the doctors say?" "Everything's fine. Just dehydration and stress." He nodded absently, still scrolling through emails. "Michael," Susan said quietly, "can you put the phone down for 5 minutes?" His blue eyes flashed with annoyance, but he slipped the device into his pocket. "Sorry, the Harrington deal is falling apart, and I've got investors breathing down my neck." "I know you're busy," she said, "but I was scared today. I thought something might be wrong with the baby." Something passed across Michael's face, an emotion she couldn't quite identify before he composed himself. "But everything's fine, right? So, no harm done." Susan blinked, hurt by his dismissiveness. "Nathan's coming to see me." Michael's jaw tightened. "Of course he is. Saint Nathan to the rescue." "He's concerned, that's all. He's interfering, as usual." Michael began pacing. "He needs to understand that you're my wife, not his to manage." Susan felt her temper flare. "He's my brother, and he cares about me, which is more than I can say for you lately." Michael stopped pacing, his expression darkening. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you've been absent for weeks, physically and emotionally. We barely talk. You come home after I'm asleep. You leave before I wake up." She took a deep breath. "Are you having an affair?" The question hung in the air between them. Michael's face went completely still. "Don't be ridiculous," he finally said, but his eyes shifted away from hers. Susan felt her heart drop. In that moment of hesitation, she knew. "Who is she?" "Susan, I'm not having this conversation here," Michael said, his voice tight. "Then where? At home? Where you never are? Over text?" Her voice rose. "Tell me the truth, Michael. I deserve that much." Michael ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like my husband is cheating on me while I'm pregnant with his child." His silence confirmed her worst fears. Susan felt the room tilt, her breath catching in her throat. 6 years together, 3 years married, and countless promises of forever, all apparently meaningless. "Who is she?" Susan repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael looked at her, his expression a mix of guilt and defiance. "Alicia Thompson." The name hit like a physical blow. Alicia, his 25-year-old assistant. The pretty blonde who had started 6 months ago and who looked at Michael with obvious admiration. The woman Susan had specifically asked him about, only to be told she was imagining things. "How long?" 2 months, he admitted. 2 months. The timing aligned perfectly with his emotional withdrawal. While Susan had been shopping for baby clothes and decorating the nursery, Michael had been betraying their vows. "I want you to leave," Susan said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the storm inside her. "Susan, let's talk about this when you're home. You're upset. You're damn right I'm upset." The calm cracked. "My husband just admitted to cheating on me with his assistant while I'm carrying his child. What did you expect? That I'd understand, that I'd forgive you?" Michael's face hardened. "You're being hysterical." "Hysterical?" Susan felt rage building in her chest. "You haven't seen hysterical yet. Get out." "This is exactly why I didn't tell you," Michael snapped. "You always overreact. You turn everything into a drama." Susan stared at him, incredulous. "Are you seriously trying to blame me for your infidelity?" "I'm not blaming you," Michael said, his tone condescending. "But let's be honest. You haven't exactly been available lately. All you talk about is the baby. All you care about is the baby." "Because I'm pregnant." Susan couldn't believe what she was hearing. "With your baby." "I know that," Michael said through clenched teeth, "and I'm trying to provide for that baby. I'm working my ass off to make sure she has everything she needs. Except a faithful father." Michael's face contorted with anger. "I made a mistake, Susan. People make mistakes. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. Sleeping with your assistant for 2 months is a choice." "I'm done with this conversation," Michael said, reaching for the door. "That's right, walk away," Susan called after him. "It's what you do best." Michael turned, his eyes cold. "You want to talk about walking away? Fine. Let's talk about how your career vanished the minute you got pregnant. Let's talk about how I'm supporting both of us now." The accusations stung. Susan had been a successful marketing executive before taking a step back during her high-risk pregnancy. It had been a mutual decision, or so she thought. "That was temporary," she said. We agreed you'd take maternity leave, not that you'd quit entirely." "I didn't quit. I'm on medical leave because this is a high-risk pregnancy," Michael scoffed. "Right. And I'm sure you'll be rushing back to work after the baby's born." "What is wrong with you?" Susan felt tears threatening. "When did you become this person?" For a moment, something like regret flickered across Michael's face. Then his phone buzzed, and the moment passed. He checked the screen. "I have to go," he said. "Of course you do." Susan turned away, refusing to let him see her cry. She heard him sigh. "I'll come back tomorrow to drive you home." "Don't bother. Nathan will take me." Michael's face darkened at the mention of her brother. "Fine. Have it your way." He reached for the door handle. "Michael," Susan called, making him pause. "When you leave this room, we're done. Do you understand? I won't be here when you come back tomorrow." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded stiffly. "We'll talk when you've calmed down." The door closed behind him, and Susan finally let the tears fall. She wrapped her arms around her belly, the only part of their marriage that still felt real. "It's just you and me now," she whispered. "But we'll be okay." She had no idea that within the hour, okay would become a distant dream. Susan was still crying when the door opened 40 minutes later. She hastily wiped her eyes, expecting a nurse or doctor. Instead, Michael stood there, his face flushed, his eyes wild. She could smell the alcohol from across the room. "You've been drinking," she said, shock momentarily overriding her anger. "Very observant," he slurred, stumbling slightly as he closed the door. Always the smart one, aren't you, Susan? Fear prickled along her spine. In 6 years, she'd never seen Michael drunk. He prided himself on his control, his composure. The man swaying before her was a stranger. "You need to leave," she said firmly, reaching for the call button. Michael moved with surprising speed, grabbing her wrist. "Not yet. We're not done." Susan tried to pull away, but his grip tightened painfully. "Michael, you're hurting me." "Hurting you?" He laughed, a harsh sound that made her flinch. "You have no idea what hurt is. Do you know what your brother did?" Susan stared at him, confusion mixing with fear. "What are you talking about?" "Your precious Nathan," Michael spat. He called the board, told them about Alicia. His fingers dug deeper into her wrist. "They're launching an investigation. Sexual harassment, they're calling it." "I didn't know," Susan said honestly. "Nathan didn't mention—" "Liar!" Michael released her wrist only to grab her shoulders, shaking her. "You put him up to this. You've always been jealous of my success." "That's not true," Susan protested, trying to push him away. "Michael, you're drunk. You need to go home and sleep it off." "Home?" His laugh was bitter. "Where's that, Susan? The house you'll take in the divorce? The life you'll destroy with your self-righteous bullshit?" "I'm not the one who destroyed our marriage," Susan shot back, anger overtaking fear. "You did that all by yourself." Something dangerous flashed in Michael's eyes. "Always the victim, aren't you?" Poor Susan, with her cheating husband and her difficult pregnancy. Before she could respond, Michael's hand shot out, connecting with her face in a stinging slap. Susan's head snapped to the side, shock momentarily paralyzing her. In 6 years, he'd never raised a hand to her. "Michael," she whispered, her hand going to her cheek. But the man standing before her wasn't the Michael she'd married. His face was contorted with rage, his eyes empty of the love that had once filled them. In that moment, Susan realized she was truly afraid of her husband. "You and that baby," he growled, "ruining everything I've worked for." Susan tried to reach for the call button, but Michael was faster. He grabbed her arm and twisted it painfully. "You think I don't know what you're planning? You'll take half of everything I own. You'll use that baby to bleed me dry." "Let go of me," Susan said, her voice shaking. "You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," Michael snarled. His eyes dropped to her pregnant belly. "That thing inside you, it's a parasite, sucking the life out of both of us." Horror washed over Susan as she realized the depth of his resentment, not just toward her, but toward their unborn child. She tried to twist away, to protect her belly, but Michael's grip was like iron. "Please," she begged, "think about what you're doing." For a moment, something like recognition flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by cold fury. "I am thinking. For the first time in years, I'm thinking about what I want." With his free hand, he reached toward her belly. Susan fought against his grip, terror giving her strength. "No, Michael, don't." But it was too late. His foot lashed out, connecting with her swollen abdomen with sickening force. Pain exploded through Susan's body, stealing her breath. She screamed, a primal sound of fear and agony. Michael stood over her, breathing heavily, his face blank as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd just done. The door burst open. Nathan Wheeler filled the doorway, his expression shifting from concern to murderous rage as he took in the scene. "Get away from her," he roared, lunging forward. Michael stumbled backward, suddenly looking sober and terrified. "Nathan, wait." Nathan didn't wait. His fist connected with Michael's jaw, sending him sprawling against the wall. Before Michael could recover, Nathan was on him, pinning him to the floor. "Security!" Nathan shouted toward the open door. "Someone get security and a doctor!" Susan curled around her belly, pain radiating through her abdomen. "The baby," she gasped. "Nathan, the baby." Nathan's head snapped toward her, his face paling. He released Michael, rushing to her side. "Susan, look at me. It's going to be okay." Medical staff flooded the room, security guards restraining a now struggling Michael. "She's lying," he shouted. "I didn't touch her, she fell." But the red mark on Susan's face and the witnesses who'd heard her scream told a different story. As they wheeled her out for an emergency ultrasound, Susan caught a final glimpse of Michael being handcuffed by hospital security, his once handsome face twisted with rage and fear. The last thread of love she'd felt for him snapped, replaced by a steely resolve. If she and her baby survived this, Michael Reynolds would pay for what he'd done. Not just with his freedom, but with everything he held dear. Chapter 2. Aftermath and Allies. The ultrasound wand moved across Susan's belly as she held her breath, eyes fixed on the monitor. The technician's face revealed nothing as she took measurements, the room silent except for the soft whooshing of the baby's heartbeat. "Is she okay?" Susan finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The technician gave her a gentle smile. "Heart rate is strong. Doctor, Williams will be in shortly to go over everything with you." Relief flooded through Susan, but the fear didn't fully subside. She'd read enough about pregnancy to know that injuries could have delayed effects. "Are you sure she's not hurt? The doctor will explain everything," the technician repeated, sympathetic but professionally reserved. As the technician finished and wiped the gel from Susan's stomach, the door opened. "Doctor." Williams entered, followed by Nathan, whose face was drawn with worry. "Ms. Reynolds," Dr. Williams said, her voice calm but serious. "How's your pain level right now?" "About a 7, Susan admitted. "It's sharper on the right side." Nathan moved to her bedside, taking her hand. His knuckles were red and starting to swell. "You should have seen the other guy," he said, attempting humor when he caught her looking. Susan squeezed his fingers, grateful for his presence. "Where's Michael?" she asked. Though what she really meant was, "Is he still here? Is he coming back?" "In police custody," Nathan said grimly. "They're charging him with assault." Dr. Williams cleared her throat. "I'd like to discuss your condition, Miss Reynolds. Your baby's heartbeat is strong, which is a good sign. However, you're experiencing a partial placental abruption." Fear clutched at Susan's heart. "What does that mean?" "It means part of the placenta has separated from the uterine wall," Dr. Williams explained. "In your case, it's a small separation, but it's serious enough that we need to keep you here for monitoring. You'll need complete bed rest." "For how long?" Susan asked, her mind racing. "At least a week here in the hospital. Then we'll re-evaluate. If the separation doesn't worsen and your baby continues to develop normally, you'll be on bed rest at home until delivery." The reality of the situation sank in. Thanks to Michael, what had been a healthy pregnancy was now high risk. "And if it gets worse?" Dr. Williams's expression remained professional but compassionate. "If the separation increases or you experience heavy bleeding, we may need to deliver early. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right now, both you and your baby are stable." Susan nodded, trying to process everything. "Can I still have a normal delivery?" "It's too early to say, Dr. Williams replied. "We'll monitor closely and make that decision as you get closer to term. The most important thing right now is keeping you and the baby safe." After Dr. Williams left, Susan turned to Nathan. "Tell me everything. What happened after they took me away?" Nathan ran a hand through his dark hair, so similar to her own. At 35, he looked every bit the successful CEO. Confident, controlled, and currently furious. "Michael's being charged with assault," he said. "There were witnesses, nurses who heard you scream, saw him standing over you, plus..." He hesitated. "Plus what, Nate?" "There's security footage from the hallway. It shows him coming back drunk, entering your room. The angle doesn't show inside the room, but the timing matches." Susan closed her eyes. "Did he say why he did it?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "He's claiming he didn't. Says you fell and made up the assault story to get back at him for the affair." He took her hand again. "But no one's buying it, Suze. Not with the mark on your face and the security footage showing him drunk." "He kicked me, Nate," Susan said quietly, opening her eyes. "He looked at my belly and kicked our baby." "Who does that?" "A monster," Nathan said simply. "One who's going to pay." Susan looked at her brother, seeing the cold determination in his eyes. "What are you planning?" "Nothing illegal," Nathan assured her. "Just justice." "Michael's looking at serious charges. Assault, domestic violence, attempted feticide in some states." "Feticide?" Susan hadn't even considered that aspect. "Harm to an unborn child," Nathan explained. "The laws vary by state, but here in Massachusetts, it's taken very seriously." Susan absently rubbed her belly, feeling a flutter of movement that brought fresh tears to her eyes. Her daughter was fighting, just like she would have to. "There's more," Nathan said hesitantly. "The police found cocaine in Michael's system." "What?" Susan stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. Michael doesn't do drugs." "Apparently he does now," Nathan said grimly. "It explains a lot. The mood swings, the aggression, the affair, classic signs of addiction." Susan tried to reconcile the image of her straight-laced, control-freak husband with someone who used cocaine. It didn't compute. "How long?" "No way to know for sure. But if I had to guess, it started with the Harrington account. That level of pressure, those kinds of clients, drugs are practically a job requirement in some of those circles." A soft knock interrupted them. A woman in a smart pantsuit entered, her expression professionally sympathetic. "Ms. Reynolds, I'm Detective Rivera with Boston PD. If you're feeling up to it, I'd like to take your statement about what happened today." Nathan straightened. "My sister needs rest." "It's okay, Nate," Susan said, though fatigue was settling deep in her bones. "I want to do this while it's fresh in my mind." Detective Rivera took a seat beside the bed. "I understand this is difficult, Ms. Reynolds, but your statement is crucial." For the next hour, Susan recounted everything, from Michael's confession about the affair to his return and the assault. Detective Rivera recorded the statement, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly letting Susan speak uninterrupted. "And you've never experienced violence from your husband before today?" the detective asked. "Never," Susan confirmed. "He's been distant lately, working long hours, but he's never been violent." "The toxicology report shows cocaine and alcohol in his system," Detective Rivera said. "Has he had substance abuse issues in the past?" "No," Susan said firmly, then hesitated. "At least, none that I knew about. We've been together 6 years, and I've never seen him use drugs." Detective Rivera nodded, making a note. "Your husband is claiming you staged this, that you were angry about the affair and deliberately fell to frame him." Susan felt a surge of indignation. "I would never put my baby at risk like that. Never." "I believe you," the detective assured her. "His story doesn't match the evidence or witness statements. I just wanted you to be prepared for what he's saying." After Detective Rivera left, promising to keep them updated, Nathan helped Susan settle back against the pillows. "You should rest," he said. "I'll be right here." Susan nodded, suddenly exhausted. "What happens now, Nate? With everything, the house, my job, the baby?" Nathan's expression softened. "Now you focus on getting better and keeping that baby safe. I'll handle everything else." "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm telling." His tone brooked no argument. "You're moving in with me after they discharge you. I have plenty of space and my housekeeper can help look after you during the day." "Nate, no arguments, Suze. I'm not leaving you alone through this." Susan felt tears threatening again. She'd always been the strong one, the independent one. Accepting help didn't come naturally, but as another wave of pain radiated through her abdomen, she acknowledged that this time she needed support. "Thank you," she whispered. Nathan leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Get some sleep, I'm not going anywhere." As Susan drifted towards sleep, one thought crystallized in her mind. Michael had taken so much from her today, her trust, her sense of safety, her uncomplicated pregnancy, but he wouldn't take anything else. Not her baby, not her dignity, not her future. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same determination that had propelled her through Harvard Business School and up the corporate ladder. Michael Reynolds had made the biggest mistake of his life by underestimating her, and he was about to find out just how costly that mistake would be. The next week passed in a blur of medical tests, police interviews, and tearful phone calls with friends and family. Susan's parents flew in from California, their retirement plans temporarily shelved as they rallied around their daughter. Her father, a retired judge, brought not just emotional support, but valuable legal connections. "Davidson and Ruiz are the best family law firm in Boston," Judge Wheeler said, setting a business card on Susan's hospital tray. "Catherine Davidson handled my colleague's divorce last year, took his cheating surgeon wife for everything she was worth." "Dad," Susan protested weakly, "I haven't even filed yet." Her father fixed her with the stern look that had intimidated countless defendants. "That man assaulted you and my granddaughter. You're filing." Her mother, Grace Wheeler, a retired professor of English literature, was less focused on vengeance and more on healing. She brought books, organic snacks, and a determination to keep Susan's spirits up despite the circumstances. "I've enrolled us in an online prenatal yoga class," Grace announced on day 3 of Susan's hospital stay. "The doctor says gentle movement is still okay, and it will help with the stress." Between her parents hovering and Nathan's daily visits, Susan barely had time to process her new reality, but in the quiet hours of the night, when the hospital settled into its restless slumber, she would place her hands on her belly and talk to her daughter. "We're survivors, you and me," she whispered, "and we're going to build something beautiful from this mess." On the 6th day, Dr. Williams brought cautiously optimistic news. The placental abruption hadn't worsened. If the next 2 days showed continued stability, Susan could be discharged to continue her bed rest at home, or rather, at Nathan's penthouse, which was rapidly being converted into a haven for a pregnant woman on bed rest. That afternoon, Catherine Davidson of Davidson and Ruiz arrived, her designer suit and sharp bob a stark contrast to Susan's hospital gown and messy ponytail. "Call me Kate," she said, settling into the visitor's chair with practiced ease. "Your father speaks very highly of you." "He speaks highly of you too," Susan replied. "He says you're ruthless." Kate's laugh was genuine. "I prefer thorough, but in cases like yours, a little ruthlessness doesn't hurt." She opened her leather portfolio. "I've reviewed your case file. How are you feeling? Physically or emotionally?" Susan asked. "Both." Susan considered the question. "Physically, I'm recovering. The baby is stable. Emotionally," she trailed off, searching for words. "I'm angry, hurt, confused, but mostly I'm determined." Kate nodded approvingly. "Determined is good. We can work with determined." She pulled out several documents. "I need to understand what you want out of this divorce. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, which means the court will divide your assets fairly, though not necessarily equally." For the next hour, they reviewed Susan and Michael's financial situation, the brownstone in Back Bay, the vacation home in Cape Cod, investment accounts, retirement funds, and Michael's stake in his firm, Reynolds and Associates. "The good news," Kate said, "is that with the criminal charges against him, we have significant leverage. The bad news is that men like Michael rarely go down without a fight." "I don't want a fight," Susan admitted. "I just want what's fair for me and my daughter." Kate's expression softened slightly. "Based on what I'm seeing, fair would be substantial. You've been married 3 years, together for 6. You put your own career on hold to support his. And now, his actions have put your health and your baby's health at risk." She leaned forward. "But let me be clear, Susan. This isn't just about money. It's about holding him accountable. It's about making sure that when your daughter asks why her father isn't in her life, you can tell her that you did everything possible to protect her and create a stable future." Susan felt the weight of those words. Whatever happened next would shape not just her life but her daughter's. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Kate smiled, all business again. "For now, focus on your health. I'll file the initial paperwork and handle Michael's attorneys. But there is one thing. We need to document everything: the assault, your injuries, the placental abruption, every medical report. Also, any evidence of his infidelity or substance abuse." "Nathan mentioned something about cocaine," Susan said hesitantly. Kate nodded. "Yes, that's in the police report. It significantly strengthens our case, especially regarding custody." The word custody hit Susan like a physical blow. Despite everything, she hadn't fully processed that her daughter would be born into a broken home, with a father who had tried to harm her before she was even born. Kate must have noticed her distress. "One step at a time," she said gently. "Right now, your job is to rest and keep that baby safe. Let me handle Michael." After Kate left, Susan found herself staring at the ceiling, thoughts swirling. Just 2 weeks ago, her biggest concern had been whether the nursery would be ready in time. Now she was planning a divorce, facing a high-risk pregnancy, and contemplating a custody battle with a man who had proved himself capable of violence. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. A nurse entered, followed by Detective Rivera. "Ms. Reynolds," the detective said, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Susan said, adjusting her position. "Any news?" Detective Rivera took the seat Kate had vacated. "I wanted to update you personally. The district attorney has decided to charge your husband with domestic assault and battery on a pregnant person, and attempted assault on a fetus." Susan felt a chill at the formal names of the charges. "What happens now?" "Mr. Reynolds was arraigned this morning. He's out on bail but with strict conditions. No contact with you, electronic monitoring, and mandatory drug testing." "He's out." Susan felt a flicker of fear. "What if he comes here?" "There's a restraining order in place," Detective Rivera assured her, "and we've alerted hospital security. But I understand your concern." She hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Your husband's firm has placed him on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation into his relationship with his assistant. So Nathan's call to the board had hit its mark." Susan felt a complicated mix of emotions, vindication but also sadness for what Michael had thrown away. "Is Alicia cooperating?" Susan asked. Detective Rivera looked surprised by the question. "She's provided a statement, yes. She claims she didn't know about the cocaine use, but admits the affair had been going on for nearly 3 months. Longer than Michael had admitted. Another lie in a growing list. "Thank you for telling me," Susan said. After Detective Rivera left, Susan reached for her phone and pulled up her text history with Michael. The messages from the past few months told their own story: his growing distance, the late nights at work, the terse responses to her questions about the baby. She scrolled back further, to happier times, the texts from their honeymoon in Bali, his excited message when they found out she was pregnant, the sweet nothing he'd send randomly throughout the day. Thinking of you. Love you more than yesterday. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Can't wait to see our baby's face. She'll be beautiful like her mama. Tears blurred her vision. The man who'd written those messages seemed like a stranger now. Or perhaps the real stranger was the man who'd stood in her hospital room and kicked their unborn child. Either way, the Michael she'd married was gone, replaced by someone she no longer recognized and couldn't trust. With a deep breath, she put the phone away. The past was done. It was time to focus on the future, a future where she and her daughter would be safe, secure, and surrounded by people who truly loved them. Whatever Michael had become, whatever demons drove him to destroy their family, they weren't her responsibility anymore. Her only responsibility now was to the life growing inside her and to herself. It was time to let go of what had been and embrace what could be. Chapter 3. The battle begins. 3 weeks after the assault, Susan sat in Nathan's expansive living room, her feet propped on an ottoman as she reviewed documents from Kate Davidson. The Boston skyline spread before her through floor-to-ceiling windows, the early summer sun glinting off glass and steel. "You sure you're comfortable enough?" Nathan asked, setting a glass of water on the side table. Since bringing her home from the hospital, he'd transformed from hard-charging CEO to hovering mother hen. "I'm fine, Nate," Susan assured him, though fine was relative. The placental abruption had stabilized, but she remained on strict bed rest, allowed to move only between bedroom, bathroom, and living room. At 27 weeks pregnant, with a belly that seemed to grow daily, even those short distances were becoming challenging. "Maria left lunch in the fridge," Nathan continued, referring to his housekeeper, who had quickly become Susan's daily companion and self-appointed nutritionist. "And I'll be home by 6 for dinner." Susan smiled at her brother's protectiveness. "Go, run your empire. I have Kate's paperwork to keep me busy." After Nathan left, Susan returned to the divorce documents, trying to focus on the cold facts and figures rather than the emotions they stirred. Michael's financial disclosures painted a picture of a man preparing for divorce long before the hospital incident. Accounts moved offshore, assets transferred to business partners, cash withdrawals that couldn't be explained. "Bastard," she muttered, rubbing her belly absently as the baby kicked. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kate. "Judge denied Michael's motion to access the house. Your restraining order stands. Small victory." Susan texted back a thank you, feeling a wave of relief. The Back Bay brownstone had been their home, filled with memories both good and bad. The thought of Michael walking through it, potentially removing items of value or sentimental importance, had been keeping her up at night. Her phone buzzed again, this time with an unknown number. She hesitated before opening the message. "Susan, it's Alicia. Can we talk? It's important." Susan stared at the text, her heart racing. Alicia Thompson, Michael's assistant, his mistress, the woman who'd helped destroy her marriage. Her first instinct was to block the number. Her second was to respond with all the venom she'd been suppressing. Instead, she set the phone down and took several deep breaths, considering her options. Talking to Alicia could be painful, even devastating, but it might also provide insights that could help her case. After several minutes of deliberation, she picked up the phone and typed, "What could we possibly have to talk about?" The response came quickly. "Things you need to know about Michael. Things I should have told you sooner." Susan's curiosity battled with her pride. "Why should I trust anything you say? You shouldn't. But I have proof, and I'm not asking for forgiveness." "Proof of what?" Susan wondered. "And why now? Was this some kind of trap Michael had engineered?" "Where and when?" she finally responded. "I can come to you. I know you're on bed rest." The fact that Alicia knew about her medical condition only intensified Susan's suspicion. "How do you know that?" "Michael's lawyers mentioned it in court." "Please, Susan, I'm trying to do the right thing here." After consulting with both Kate and Nathan, who insisted on being present for the meeting, Susan agreed to see Alicia the following day. Alicia Thompson was younger and prettier in person than in the employee photo Susan had scrutinized online. She sat perched on the edge of Nathan's sofa, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, her eyes red-rimmed from what appeared to be recent tears. Nathan stood by the window, arms crossed, his expression making it clear he was there as Susan's protector, not as a neutral party. Kate sat beside Susan, professional but watchful. "Thank you for seeing me," Alicia began, her voice smaller than Susan had imagined. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Susan replied. "You said you have information about Michael. What is it?" Alicia reached into her purse and pulled out a flash drive. "Everything's on here. Emails, text messages, photos, recordings of conversations. Michael's been planning to leave you for months, but not because of me." She placed the drive on the coffee table. "Because of the baby." Susan felt as if she'd been slapped. "What? He never wanted children," Alicia continued. "He told me the pregnancy was an accident, that you stopped taking birth control without telling him." "That's a lie," Susan said, her voice tight with anger. "We planned this pregnancy. We tried for almost a year." Alicia nodded. "I know. I found the fertility app on his phone. Saw the calendar reminders. He was lying to me, just like he was lying to you." Kate leaned forward. "Miss Thompson, why are you coming forward now? You must realize this could implicate you in potential legal issues." Alicia's composure cracked slightly. "Because I watched him spiral out of control. Because what happened at the hospital." She swallowed hard. "I never thought he was capable of that." "But you knew about the cocaine," Nathan interjected, his tone accusatory. Alicia looked down at her hands. "Not at first, but yes, eventually I figured it out. It started with the Harrington deal. The pressure was intense, the hours insane. Someone offered him something to help him focus. By the time I realized how bad it was, we were—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "Having an affair," Susan supplied flatly. Alicia nodded miserably. "He said he was going to leave you after the baby was born. Said you'd be too focused on motherhood to fight him on the divorce. He had it all planned. How much he'd offer in child support, which assets he'd let you keep." Susan felt nauseous. While she'd been picking out nursery colors, Michael had been plotting their separation. "What changed?" Kate asked. "Why the assault?" Alicia's eyes filled with tears. The Harrington deal fell through. Michael was already using heavily, but that sent him over the edge. And then Nathan called the board about our relationship. All eyes turned to Nathan, who didn't look remotely apologetic. "He was taking advantage of a subordinate and cheating on my pregnant sister. Damn right I called the board." "The thing is," Alicia continued, "that call triggered an internal review of all his recent deals. There were irregularities." Kate's eyebrows shot up. "What kind of irregularities?" "I'm not supposed to talk about it. The firm has me under an NDA." "Ms. Thompson," Kate said carefully, "if you have knowledge of financial wrongdoing, that could significantly impact the divorce proceedings." Alicia looked torn. "I could lose my job. You could face worse if you're involved in covering up financial crimes," Kate pointed out. After a long moment, Alicia nodded. "It's all on the drive? Account numbers, wire transfers, emails where Michael discusses moving money offshore. He started right around the time you got pregnant," she said to Susan. Susan tried to process this information. It aligned with Kate's findings about unexplained transfers, but suggested something far more deliberate than divorce planning. "Why are you really doing this?" Susan asked, studying Alicia's face. "The truth." Alicia met her gaze directly for the first time. "Because I was pregnant too." The room fell silent. Susan felt as if the air had been sucked out of her lungs. "Was?" Nathan finally asked. Alicia's chin trembled slightly. "I lost it, at 8 weeks. When I told Michael, he said it was for the best. Said one baby was already ruining his life, he didn't need another." She wiped away a tear. "That's when I knew. Everything he'd told me about you, about your marriage, about wanting to be with me. It was all lies." Susan didn't know how to feel. Anger, pity, vindication, and grief all swirled together in a toxic cocktail. "I'm sorry," Alicia said quietly, "for all of it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just thought you deserved to know the truth before the hearing next week." After Alicia left, Susan sat in stunned silence, the flash drive sitting like a grenade on the coffee table. "I need to review this immediately," Kate said, picking it up. "If what she says is true, especially about the financial improprieties, we need to adjust our strategy." Nathan paced the length of the living room. "Can we trust her? This could be some ploy Michael concocted." "It's possible," Kate agreed, "but unlikely. The risk to her professionally would be too great if she's lying." She turned to Susan. "How are you holding up?" Susan placed a protective hand over her belly. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wishes I didn't know any of this. The other part, Wants ammunition, Kate supplied. It's natural, Susan. He hurt you, betrayed you, physically attacked you and your unborn child. It's okay to want justice. Justice. The word hung in the air between them. What did justice look like in a situation like this? Prison time for Michael, financial compensation, public humiliation. None of it would erase what had happened or heal the emotional wounds Michael had inflicted. None of it would guarantee her daughter's safety and happiness, but it would be a start. Review everything, Susan told Kate. Use whatever helps our case. I want full custody, the house, and every penny he tried to hide from me. Her voice hardened. He thought I'd be too focused on motherhood to fight him. Let's show him how wrong he was. Nathan smiled grimly. That's the Susan I know. As Kate packed up her briefcase, promising to call as soon as she'd reviewed the drive's contents, Susan felt the baby move inside her, a strong, determined kick that seemed to say, I'm still here. We're still fighting. Whatever happens, she whispered to her belly once she was alone, we have each other, and that's more than enough. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a sweltering day in early July. At 30 weeks pregnant, with her doctor's reluctant permission, Susan prepared to face Michael in court for the first time since the hospital. Remember, this is just procedural, Kate reminded her as they sat in the courthouse corridor. The judge will review our petition, set temporary orders for support and the restraining order, and establish a timeline for the full divorce proceedings. Susan nodded, adjusting her position on the hard bench. Despite the air conditioning, she felt overheated in her conservative navy maternity dress. And Michael will be there? Yes, with his attorney, but there will be security present, and he can't approach you. Nathan sat on Susan's other side, his normally impeccable suit slightly rumpled after a red-eye flight from San Francisco, where he'd been handling a corporate crisis. I still think you should have let me hire private security, he grumbled. And look like I'm afraid of him? Susan shook her head. That's exactly what he wants. The truth was, she was afraid. Not of physical harm, not in a courthouse surrounded by people, but of her own reaction to seeing him. Would she feel the old pull of attraction? Would anger overwhelm her carefully constructed composure? Would she break down in tears? She'd rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, imagining herself cool and dignified, while Michael looked defeated and diminished. But as the courtroom doors opened and people began filing in, doubt crept in. Maybe she wasn't ready for this confrontation. Ms. Reynolds? A court officer approached. Judge Patel is ready for you. With Kate on one side and Nathan on the other, Susan entered the courtroom. Her eyes immediately found Michael, sitting at the defendant's table with an older man she recognized as Stanley Hoffman, one of Boston's most expensive divorce attorneys. Michael looked different, thinner, paler, his usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled. When he saw her, his expression flickered between surprise, anger, and something that might have been regret. Susan held his gaze for a moment before taking her seat, her hand instinctively moving to her now prominent belly. Let him see what he tried to destroy, she thought. Let him remember what he lost. Judge Anjali Patel, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, called the court to order. Reynolds vs. Reynolds, preliminary hearing for divorce and restraining order, she announced, reviewing the file before her. I see we have some serious allegations here, including domestic violence and potential financial misconduct. That's correct, Your Honor, Kate responded, rising smoothly. Given the severity of the assault, which resulted in a partial placental abruption requiring my client to remain on bed rest, and the defendant's ongoing criminal case, we're seeking to expedite the temporary orders for support and exclusive use of the marital home. Stanley Hoffman stood, his voice oily with false concern. Your Honor, while we acknowledge the unfortunate incident at the hospital, my client maintains his innocence in the criminal matter. Furthermore, Ms. Reynolds has been comfortably residing in her brother's luxury penthouse. There is no urgency regarding the marital home. Unfortunate incident, Nathan muttered under his breath. He kicked his pregnant wife in the stomach. Susan placed a restraining hand on her brother's arm as Judge Patel fixed Hoffman with a cold stare. Mr. Hoffman, I've reviewed the hospital records and police reports. Let's not minimize what occurred here. She turned to Kate. Ms. Davidson, what specific orders are you seeking today? For the next hour, Kate methodically laid out their requests. Continuation of the restraining order, exclusive use of the marital home, temporary spousal support, and an emergency injunction preventing Michael from accessing or transferring certain financial assets identified in Alicia's documents. Stanley Hoffman fought back, portraying Michael as the victim of a vindictive wife and her overzealous brother, suggesting that Susan's injuries were exaggerated and that she was using the pregnancy to gain sympathy and financial advantage. "My client is prepared to support his child when it arrives," Hoffman said, "but he has concerns about Ms. Reynolds' mental stability and fitness as a parent, given her history of emotional manipulation." Susan felt rage building in her chest. History of emotional manipulation? That was rich, coming from a man who had systematically lied to her for months. "Your Honor," Kate countered, her voice razor-sharp, "Mr. Reynolds tested positive for cocaine on the day of the assault. He has since failed 2 mandatory drug tests required by his bail conditions. If anyone's fitness as a parent should be questioned, it's his." Judge Patel nodded, making notes. "Mr. Hoffman, does your client wish to address these allegations?" Hoffman conferred briefly with Michael before responding. "My client acknowledges a temporary lapse in judgment regarding recreational substances, but has since enrolled in a rehabilitation program. He maintains that his use was sporadic and did not impact his professional performance or personal relationships." Kate looked like she might object, but Judge Patel held up a hand. "I've heard enough from the attorneys. Ms. Reynolds, would you like to make a statement to the court?" Susan hadn't expected this opportunity. She glanced at Kate, who gave a slight nod. Slowly, Susan stood, one hand supporting her back, the other resting on her belly. She had prepared no speech, but as she faced the judge, the words came with surprising clarity. "Your Honor, 3 months ago I was happily married and excited about becoming a mother. Then I discovered my husband was not only unfaithful, but had been planning to leave me after our baby was born. When confronted, he became violent in a way I never could have imagined from the man I married." She paused, gathering strength. "My daughter and I nearly paid the ultimate price for his actions. Every day I worry about what might happen if the placental abruption worsens, if I go into preterm labor, if my baby suffers lasting effects from the trauma she experienced before she was even born." Susan could feel Michael's eyes on her, but didn't look his way. "I'm not seeking vengeance, Your Honor. I'm seeking protection for myself and for my child. I'm seeking financial security after my husband tried to hide assets that we built together during our marriage. Most of all, I'm seeking the chance to rebuild my life and provide a safe, stable home for my daughter." Judge Patel's expression remained neutral, but her eyes showed compassion. "Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, would you like to respond?" All eyes turned to Michael, who stood slowly, his once confident posture now hesitant. "Your Honor, I made mistakes, serious ones. The pressure of work, the impending responsibility of fatherhood, they led me to make choices I deeply regret." Susan almost scoffed aloud at his attempt to blame stress and impending fatherhood for cocaine use and infidelity. "But I never intended to harm Susan or our child," Michael continued. "What happened at the hospital was a terrible accident, exacerbated by substances I should never have used. I've been getting help, attending rehab and counseling. I'm committed to making amends and being part of my child's life." Judge Patel studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Reynolds, intentions aside, your actions had severe consequences. This court's primary concern is the safety and well-being of Ms. Reynolds and your unborn child." She shuffled her papers, decision apparently made. "I am granting all temporary orders as requested by the petitioner. The restraining order will remain in effect. Ms. Reynolds shall have exclusive use of the marital home once her medical condition allows. Mr. Reynolds will provide temporary support in the amount of $12,000 monthly until the final divorce decree." Susan felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it was a start. "Furthermore," Judge Patel continued, "I'm issuing an injunction preventing Mr. Reynolds from accessing or transferring the accounts identified in Exhibit C. The court takes allegations of hidden assets very seriously." She fixed Michael with a stern look. "Mr. Reynolds, let me be clear. Any attempt to circumvent these orders will result in contempt charges. Do you understand?" Michael nodded stiffly. "Yes, Your Honor." "Very well. We'll reconvene in 60 days to review these orders and set a trial date for the divorce proceedings, assuming the parties cannot reach a settlement." Judge Patel gathered her files. "Court is adjourned." As people began to rise, Michael suddenly moved toward Susan, stopping when court officers stepped forward. "Susan, please," he called. "Can we talk just for a minute?" Kate placed a protective arm around Susan's shoulders. "My client has nothing to say to you, Mr. Reynolds. The restraining order prohibits any contact." But Susan paused, curious despite herself. "What is it, Michael?" His face showed genuine anguish, or an excellent facsimile. "I'm sorry for everything. I was out of my mind that day. The drugs, the stress. I never meant to hurt you or the baby." Nathan stepped forward, positioning himself between Susan and Michael. "Save it for someone who believes your bullshit. Let's go, Suze." As they turned to leave, Michael called after them, "I want to be part of my daughter's life, Susan. You can't keep her from me forever." Susan stopped, turning slowly. "You gave up that right when you kicked me in the stomach," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent courtroom. "Remember that moment, Michael, every time you wonder why you're not in her life." Outside the courthouse, sheltered from the July heat in the air-conditioned lobby, Susan finally let her composure crack. "He's sorry," she said bitterly. "As if that fixes anything." Kate squeezed her shoulder. "It doesn't. But we won today, Susan. We got everything we asked for." Nathan checked his phone. "Car's outside. Let's get you home and off your feet." As they made their way through the lobby, Susan spotted Alicia Thompson standing near the exit, clearly waiting for them. Nathan tensed, but Susan shook her head. "It's okay," she said. "I want to talk to her." Alicia approached hesitantly. "I just wanted to check. Did the information help?" "It did," Kate confirmed. "The judge granted an injunction on all the accounts you identified." Relief flashed across Alicia's face. "Good. That's good." She glanced at Susan. "How are you feeling?" The question was so mundane, so normal in its concern, that Susan almost laughed. How was she feeling? Exhausted, angry, vindicated, terrified, hopeful, all of it swirling together in a cocktail of emotions too complex to name. "I'm surviving," she answered honestly. "One day at a time." Alicia nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Me too." She hesitated before adding, "The firm fired him yesterday. The internal investigation found evidence of financial improprieties beyond what I gave you." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "They'll be reporting it to the SEC." "Already have," Alicia confirmed. "And to the police." Susan absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the man she thought she'd married. "Did you ever really know him?" she asked Alicia. "The real Michael?" Alicia shook her head slowly. "I thought I did, but now I'm not sure anyone did." As they parted ways, Susan wondered if that was true. Had she ever known the real Michael Reynolds, or had she fallen in love with a carefully constructed facade, a man who existed only in her imagination? Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. The Michael she'd loved was gone if he'd ever existed at all. In his place was a stranger, a cocaine addict, a cheater, an abuser, possibly a financial criminal. And as the car pulled away from the courthouse, Susan made a silent promise to herself and her unborn daughter. They would never again allow themselves to be deceived by beautiful lies or charming facades. Reality, however harsh, was always preferable to dangerous illusions. Chapter 4. Rebirth and Reckoning. The September morning dawned crisp and clear, a welcome respite from the summer's humidity. Susan stood at the nursery window, watching golden light filter through the newly hung curtains. At 39 weeks pregnant, her body was ready, even eager, to finally meet the daughter who had fought alongside her through these tumultuous months. The Back Bay brownstone, once filled with memories of her life with Michael, had been transformed. New paint, new furniture, new energy. Susan had reclaimed the space, turning it from a painful reminder into a sanctuary for herself and her soon-to-arrive child. "What do you think, Peanut?" she murmured, rubbing her belly. "Did Mama do a good job with your room?" The nursery, once painted in Michael's choice of sterile grey, now glowed with soft lavender walls and woodland-themed accents. A hand-painted mural of silver birch trees stretched across one wall, the work of a local artist Susan had discovered at a street fair. It was nothing like the nursery she and Michael had planned, and that was exactly the point. Her phone chimed with a text from Nathan. "Court docs signed. Final divorce decree official as of 9:12 a.m. Congratulations, you're free." Susan sat in the rocking chair beside the crib, letting the news sink in. After months of legal battles, psychiatric evaluations, and financial investigations, it was finally over. Michael Reynolds was officially her ex-husband. She texted back, "Best birthday present ever for baby girl." Nathan's response came quickly. "One of many. Wait till she sees Uncle Nate's gift." Susan smiled, imagining her brother's probably outrageous present. Since her discharge from the hospital in July, Nathan had been on a baby shopping spree that bordered on obsessive. The guest room in his penthouse, temporarily converted into a nursery during her bed rest, contained enough baby equipment and toys to stock a small store. A knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Susan leveraged herself out of the rocking chair with some difficulty and made her way downstairs. Through the peephole, she saw Kate Davidson standing on her doorstep. "You didn't have to deliver the news in person," Susan said as she opened the door. Kate smiled, holding up a gift bag. "I never pass up a chance to celebrate a well-earned victory." She stepped inside, eyeing Susan's protruding belly. "How much longer?" "Officially, a week, but Dr. Williams says it could be any day now." Susan led her into the kitchen, where sunlight streamed through the bay windows. "Coffee? Tea?" "Tea, please. I've already hit my caffeine limit for the day." Kate set the gift bag on the counter. "Open it." Susan pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a shield. "Protection," Kate explained, "for new beginnings." Susan felt tears spring to her eyes, a frequent occurrence these days. "It's beautiful. Thank you." As Susan prepared tea, Kate spread documents across the kitchen island. "Everything's official. The house is solely in your name now, along with the investment accounts we identified. Michael keeps the Cape Cod property and his personal accounts, minus the settlement amount." Susan nodded, setting steaming mugs on the counter. "And the restraining order?" "Extended for 3 years, with an option to renew." Kate took a sip of tea. "He's prohibited from coming within 500 feet of you or the baby, with supervised visitation only after completion of both rehab and anger management programs." The mention of visitation still made Susan's stomach clench. Despite everything, Massachusetts family courts favored some level of paternal involvement when possible. The best she'd been able to secure was stringent conditions that would likely take Michael years to satisfy, if he even tried. "Has he completed the rehab program?" Susan asked. Kate shook her head. "Dropped out after 3 weeks. And with the SEC investigation ongoing, he has bigger concerns than visitation rights." The Securities and Exchange Commission investigation had been the final nail in Michael's coffin. Following Alicia's revelations and the firm's internal investigation, federal authorities had uncovered a pattern of financial misconduct stretching back nearly 2 years. Michael was facing potential securities fraud charges that could result in significant prison time. "Have you heard from him at all?" Kate asked carefully. "Not directly," Susan replied. "His mother called last week asking about the baby. She wants to be involved." "And how do you feel about that?" Susan sighed, absently stroking her belly. "Conflicted. Elizabeth was always kind to me, and she's devastated by Michael's actions. But I'm not sure I want any connection to the Reynolds family right now." Kate nodded, understanding. "You don't have to decide immediately. Focus on the birth first, then tackle the grandmother question." After Kate left, Susan wandered through the house, appreciating the silence and solitude that had become precious to her. The past months had been a whirlwind of medical appointments, legal meetings, and well-meaning visitors. Between her parents' extended stay, Nathan's daily check-ins, and friends rallying around her, she'd had precious little time to simply be alone with her thoughts. In the living room, she paused before the fireplace, looking at the photos arranged on the mantel. She'd removed all images of Michael, replacing them with pictures of herself with Nathan and her parents, college friends, and snapshots from her solo travels before marriage. It was a visual reminder that her life had been full before Michael and would be full after him. A framed ultrasound image held the place of honor in the center, her daughter's profile clearly visible, one tiny hand raised as if waving. Susan touched the frame gently. "Just you and me now, Peanut. But we're going to be just fine." As if in response, a sharp pain radiated across her abdomen. Susan sucked in a breath, recognizing the sensation from her birthing classes. A contraction, stronger than the Braxton Hicks she'd been experiencing for weeks. She glanced at her watch, noting the time. Probably nothing, she told herself. False labor was common at 39 weeks. 20 minutes later, when another contraction hit with increased intensity, Susan began to reconsider. She called Dr. Williams's office, described her symptoms, and was advised to monitor the contractions. "If they become regular and closer together, head to the hospital," the nurse instructed. Susan spent the next 4 hours pacing her home, timing contractions that gradually increased in frequency and intensity. She packed her hospital bag, notified Nathan and her parents, and tried to remain calm despite the growing realization that after everything, the betrayal, the assault, the divorce, the moment of truth had arrived. By early evening, her contractions were 5 minutes apart and unmistakably the real thing. Nathan arrived to drive her to the hospital, his usual composed demeanor replaced by barely contained panic. "Should you be walking?" he asked as she made her way down the front steps. "Should I carry you? Where's the bag? Did you call Mom and Dad? Is there anything else we need?" Susan couldn't help but laugh, despite her discomfort. "Nate, breathe. I'm the one in labor here." The ride to Massachusetts General Hospital was mercifully quick, with Nathan breaking several traffic laws along the way. By the time they reached the maternity ward, Susan's contractions were coming every 4 minutes. "First baby?" the admitting nurse asked with a knowing smile. "Yes," Susan confirmed, breathing through another contraction, "but we've already been through a lot together." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of pain, determination, and surprising moments of clarity. Susan had opted for an epidural, given the placental issues earlier in her pregnancy, but remained fully present and engaged in the birth process. Nathan stayed by her side throughout, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, and offering encouragement that ranged from heartfelt to hilariously misguided. "You're doing great, Suze," he said during a particularly difficult contraction, "just like when you ran that half-marathon in college." Susan had glared at him through pain-glazed eyes. "Nothing like that. Nothing like anything, ever." As dawn broke over Boston, painting the hospital room in soft golden light, Dr. Williams announced that it was time to push. "Your daughter is ready to meet you, Susan," she said, her calm confidence a balm to Susan's frayed nerves. With one final monumental effort, Susan brought her daughter into the world at 6:17 a.m. on September 22nd, exactly 1 week before her due date, and precisely 6 months after the day in the hospital that had changed everything. "She's perfect," Dr. Williams announced, placing the squalling, squirming infant on Susan's chest. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, and absolutely beautiful. Susan gazed down at her daughter's face, taking in the dark hair, the tiny nose, the rosebud mouth currently open in an indignant cry. Love, pure, fierce, and overwhelming, washed over her, bringing fresh tears to her eyes. "Hello, Olivia," she whispered, the name she'd chosen months ago finally finding its rightful owner. "I'm your mom." Nathan, normally articulate to a fault, seemed rendered speechless. He started, then stopped, swallowing hard. "She's amazing, Suze." "Want to hold your niece, Uncle Nate?" Susan asked. With uncharacteristic hesitation, Nathan carefully took the swaddled bundle. His expression as he looked down at Olivia's face was one of pure wonder. "She has your chin," he said softly, "and Grandpa's eyes." Susan watched her brother and daughter together, feeling a profound sense of rightness. This was her family now, not the one she'd imagined when she married Michael, but perhaps the one she was always meant to have. Later that afternoon, as Susan dozed in the hospital bed with Olivia, sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside her, she was awakened by a soft knock at the door. "Come in," she called, expecting the nurse for another vitals check. Instead, Elizabeth Reynolds stood in the doorway, her elegant figure somehow diminished since Susan had last seen her at Christmas. "Susan," she said tentatively, "I hope it's all right that I came." Susan hesitated only briefly before nodding. Whatever issues existed between her and Michael, his mother had always shown her nothing but kindness. "You can come in, Elizabeth." Michael's mother approached the bassinet slowly, as if afraid of being sent away. When she saw Olivia, her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh," she breathed, "she's beautiful." "Would you like to hold her?" Susan offered. Elizabeth looked surprised by the invitation. "Are you sure?" In answer, Susan carefully lifted Olivia and placed her in Elizabeth's waiting arms. The older woman's eyes filled with tears as she gazed down at her granddaughter. "She looks like you," Elizabeth said after a moment, "but I see a little of Michael, too, around the eyes." Susan had noticed the same thing, but hadn't wanted to acknowledge it. No matter how much she wished otherwise, Olivia would always carry a part of Michael with her. "I want you to know," Elizabeth said, her voice low with emotion, "I don't condone what Michael did, any of it. What he did to you was unforgivable." Susan nodded, unexpected emotion tightening her throat. "Thank you for saying that." "I raised him better than that," Elizabeth continued, gently rocking Olivia. "Or I thought I did. I keep asking myself where I went wrong, how I missed the signs." "It's not your fault," Susan said automatically, though part of her had wondered the same thing. Had the Reynolds' privileged pressure cooker upbringing contributed to Michael's capacity for violence? His mother's blind eye to his father's workaholism? The emphasis on success at any cost. Elizabeth met her eyes directly. I'd like to be part of her life, if you'll allow it. Not to make excuses for Michael or to replace you in any way, just to be her grandmother. Susan considered the request. Despite everything, Olivia deserved to know her family. All of her family. We can start slow, she offered. Visits when I'm present, holidays maybe. Relief and gratitude washed over Elizabeth's face. Thank you, that's more than I hoped for. She looked down at Olivia again. She deserves all the love in the world. On that, at least, they could agree. 3 months later, Susan sat in the witness box of a federal courtroom. Olivia safely with Nathan and her parents. Michael sat at the defendant's table, the expensive suits of his corporate days replaced by a sober blue one that couldn't quite mask how much weight he'd lost. The SEC's case against him was damning. Wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering. The evidence Alicia had provided was just the tip of the iceberg. Once federal investigators started digging, they'd uncovered a pattern of misconduct stretching back years, long before Susan's pregnancy, before the cocaine, before Alicia. As Susan testified about the offshore accounts, the unexplained cash withdrawals, and the conversations where Michael had unwittingly revealed aspects of his financial misconduct, she avoided looking directly at him. It wasn't fear that kept her eyes averted. It was indifference. The man who had once been the center of her world now seemed like a stranger, someone she'd read about in a newspaper but had never actually known. Mrs. Reynolds, the prosecutor said, can you tell the court about the conversation you had with the defendant on March 12th of last year? It's Ms. Wheeler now, Susan corrected gently, having reverted to her maiden name after the divorce. And yes, I remember that conversation clearly. Michael, Mr. Reynolds, was agitated about a call from his firm's compliance officer. He told me it was bureaucratic nonsense and that everyone does it. Did he specify what it was? Moving client funds between accounts to maximize returns. He said it was standard practice but needed to be kept quiet because regulators wouldn't understand. The prosecutor nodded, satisfied. Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. No further questions. Michael's attorney, a sharp-faced woman who specialized in white-collar crime, approached for cross-examination. Ms. Wheeler, isn't it true that you and Mr. Reynolds were experiencing marital difficulties at the time of this alleged conversation? Susan didn't flinch. We weren't, actually. That was before I discovered his affair and drug use. The attorney changed tactics. And you have a financial interest in the outcome of this case, do you not? If Mr. Reynolds is convicted, it could affect his ability to challenge the divorce settlement. The divorce is final, Susan replied calmly. And I've already received the settlement determined by the court. I have no financial interest in these proceedings. But you do have a personal interest in seeing your ex-husband punished, don't you? The prosecutor stood. Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge ruled. Michael's attorney pressed on. Ms. Wheeler, did you have any direct knowledge of Mr. Reynolds' business dealings? Any financial training that would help you understand the transactions you're testifying about? I have an MBA from Harvard Business School, Susan replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. Before my pregnancy, I was a marketing executive at Davis & Stone. So yes, I understand basic business ethics and financial regulations. By the time Susan was dismissed from the stand, she felt drained but satisfied. She had done her part to ensure that Michael faced consequences for all his actions, not just those against her and Olivia, but against his clients, his colleagues, and the system he'd tried to manipulate for his own gain. In the corridor outside the courtroom, Alicia Thompson waited, her blonde hair now cut short in a style that made her look older, more serious. How did it go? She asked as Susan approached. About as expected, Susan replied. You're up tomorrow. Alicia nodded, nervousness evident in her posture. As Michael's former assistant, her testimony would be crucial to establishing the timeline of his fraudulent activities. I'm terrified, she admitted, but ready. The two women had developed an unlikely alliance over the past months. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual respect born of shared trauma and the determination to see justice done. You'll do fine, Susan assured her. Just tell the truth. That's all any of us can do now. As they parted ways, Susan felt a buzzing in her pocket, a text from Nathan. Olivia just rolled over for the first time, sending video. Susan smiled as she watched the clip of her daughter's milestone, life's simple joy breaking through the tension of the day. Whatever happened with Michael, whatever the court decided, this was what mattered now. Olivia's first role, first smile, first word. The future, not the past. 2 weeks later, the verdict came down. Guilty on all charges. Michael Reynolds was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. As the judge delivered the sentence, Susan sat in the back of the courtroom, not out of obligation, but to witness the final chapter of this part of her story. Michael didn't look back as he was led away. Perhaps he knew she was there, perhaps he didn't. Either way, it no longer mattered. The connection between them, once so strong she'd believed it unbreakable, had been severed long before this moment. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. Susan hesitated, then stepped up to the microphones. "Today isn't about revenge," she said clearly. "It's about accountability. Michael Reynolds made choices that hurt not just me and our daughter, but many others. Those choices have consequences, as they should." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "For my part, I'm focused on the future, on raising my daughter with love, integrity, and strength, on showing her that even when life takes unexpected turns, we can find our way forward." A reporter called out, "Do you have any message for Mr. Reynolds?" Susan shook her head. "No, I've said everything I needed to say to him." With that, she turned away from the cameras and walked toward the waiting car, where Nathan stood holding Olivia. Her daughter's face lit up with a gummy smile as Susan approached, tiny arms reaching out. "There's my girl," Susan murmured, taking Olivia into her arms. "Ready to go home?" 1 year later, Susan zipped Olivia's jacket against the crisp October air as they prepared to leave the park. At 15 months, Olivia Wheeler was a bundle of energy and curiosity, with Susan's chestnut hair and determined chin. And yes, Elizabeth had been right. Michael's eyes, a piercing blue that sometimes caught Susan off guard. "Swing more?" Olivia pleaded, pointing back to the playground. "Not today, sweet pea. It's getting cold, and Uncle Nate is coming for dinner, remember?" "Nate!" Olivia clapped her hands, easily distracted by the mention of her beloved uncle. As they walked the tree-lined path toward home, Susan reflected on the year that had passed since Michael's sentencing. Life had settled into a new normal. Not the one she'd planned, but one that suited her nonetheless. She'd returned to work part-time at a boutique marketing firm that specialized in female-founded startups, a position that allowed her to use her skills while maintaining flexibility for Olivia. The renovation of the brownstone was complete, every trace of Michael erased and replaced with Susan's own vision. And her relationship with Elizabeth Reynolds had evolved into something resembling friendship, the older woman proving to be a loving grandmother who respected Susan's boundaries. Nathan remained their rock, his CEO responsibilities somehow never interfering with his commitment to being present in Olivia's life. Susan sometimes worried he was sacrificing too much of his own life for them, but he insisted there was nowhere he'd rather be than with his niece. "Are you sure you don't want to move to California?" her father had asked during their last visit. "We've got plenty of room, and your mother would love having Olivia nearby." Susan had considered it briefly. Starting over completely somewhere new was tempting. But Boston was home now, not because of the past she'd shared with Michael, but because of the future she was building without him. "We're doing well here, Dad," she'd answered. "This is where our life is now." And it was true. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, Susan had found a strength and clarity she hadn't known she possessed. The woman who had once defined herself as Michael Reynolds' wife now stood firmly on her own, confident in her choices, and focused on raising her daughter with the values she held dear. As they neared home, Susan's phone buzzed with an email notification. She shifted Olivia to her hip to check it, expecting something from work. Instead, it was from Catherine Davidson, her divorce attorney. "Thought you should know. Michael Reynolds was denied early parole yesterday. The board cited lack of remorse and failure to complete required rehabilitation programs. He'll be eligible to apply again in 18 months. Susan read the message twice, trying to identify what she felt. Relief? Vindication? Neither, she realized. Just a distant acknowledgement of information that no longer held power over her life. She slipped the phone back into her pocket without responding. That chapter was closed. "Mama, look!" Olivia pointed to a squirrel darting across their path, delighted by the simple wonder of nature. Susan smiled, kneeling to her daughter's level. "I see it, baby. Isn't it quick?" Olivia nodded solemnly, then wrapped her arms around Susan's neck in one of her spontaneous hugs that never failed to melt her mother's heart. In that moment, standing on a leaf-strewn sidewalk with her daughter's warmth against her chest, Susan felt the final pieces click into place. The journey hadn't been what she expected. The path had twisted and turned in ways she could never have anticipated, but it had led her here, to this life, this child, this version of herself she was still discovering. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worth it. As they continued toward home, Susan thought of something her mother had told her during those dark days after the hospital. Sometimes, the most beautiful things grow from the most broken places. Looking at Olivia's face, flushed with cold and happiness, Susan knew it was true. From the ashes of her marriage, from the pain and betrayal, from the moment when everything seemed lost, had come this, a love fiercer and more profound than anything she'd known before, a purpose clearer than any she'd ever pursued. "Mama loves you," she whispered to Olivia as they reached their front steps. "Love, Mama," Olivia replied, patting Susan's cheek with a tiny hand. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the millionaire husband who had betrayed her, not the CEO brother who had witnessed it, not the courtrooms or the headlines or the whispers that had followed her through the darkest days. Just this, a mother and daughter building a life together one day at a time, survivors both of them, stronger than anyone had given them credit for. As Susan turned the key in the lock and stepped into the warmth of their home, she felt not the weight of the past but the promise of the future, bright, open and entirely their own.